Welcome to Order Militarist Radio TV. We are back again with Brother Alexis Bonolo. Right now, currently, in many states across America, the domestic terrorist organization Antifa and other organizations that need to be labeled as terrorist organizations, Black Lives Matter and others, they want the destruction of America and install anarchy and communism. 3 revolutions are very important and personal, and my family was in all 3, both on the American side and French side during the American Revolution. The French Revolution, where my family members were murdered. And there's another revolution that took place under communism, the October Revolution, where the Tsar and the family of Russia were murdered and communism entered the world. Welcome, Brother Alexis.
Thank you, AJ. It's always a pleasure to be on Order Militarist Radio TV.
All right. What is a revolution and what causes a revolution?
Okay, so revolution from the Latin meaning to turn again. And in politics, it refers to a change of power in government. So there's good revolutions and bad revolutions and just revolutions and unjust revolutions and violent revolutions and non-violent revolutions. For example, the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine more than 10 years ago, where everyone came out and manifested and there was a change of government. We might call it a peaceful revolution, although there was some violence. But because of what the Marxists have done in attempting overthrowing legitimate governments around the world in the last, let's say, 140 years, revolution's taken on a sense where most people hear it, they're thinking of violent, anarchical seizing of power by some small group. That's about the only time you hear the phrase anymore. Although in the American Revolution, we still keep the sense of what it means. Although the colonies were really just trying to obtain more rights for themselves, they ended up breaking with England and setting up their own government. So it was more like a war of rebellion. I think they call it that in the United Kingdom, a war of rebellion, than an actual revolution. But from the colonist point of view, they were just changing the way of being British citizens. So that's what revolution means in of itself. It just refers to change in power. It doesn't have any specifics. But in today's program, we'll be talking about violent anarchical revolution.
Yeah. Can a revolution be a just war?
Yeah, okay, so a revolution can be just, but it only in the case where the power governing is unjust. And that's, for example, there's a foreign invasion, your country's conquered, and they set up a puppet state that is ruling like a dictatorship or whatever over your country. The people can fight a revolution to liberate themselves from that puppet government. Or the king is overthrown and some dictator takes his place, the people can overthrow that government if it's unjust. So a just revolution is one that follows the concept of a just war. Is the cause just? Okay, is the power that rules over you in of itself, in principle, unjust? So consequently, a monarchy that's been in existence for centuries and has always governed the land, there can't be a just revolution to overthrow it, because if there is a problem, it's probably not in the monarch, it's probably in the corruption of the institutions. So it would be sufficient to arrest everyone in the ministries or in the court and form an honest and just government. But attack the king himself and overthrow the monarchy would be unjust because his family has ruled there for centuries and has certain rights. Is he an honest or just man? Well, that's another thing. Few kings have been so maniacal as to be hateful in themselves. It's usually because their government becomes unjust. And that's probably one of the weaknesses of monarchy, because if the king fails to see that his court is just and his ministers are just, he loses the support of the people, and he gives an occasion to others to attempt to enter in and overthrow the state.
What is anarchy and how is it spread?
So anarchy is from the Greek word anarchos, which means without law or rule. And anarchy is, in politics, refers to a state in which there is no government and anyone can do what they please. You could say mayhem. Any kind of group does what it likes. They can murder one another or destroy or whatever. In a lot of these zones we see here in the United States now, where these riots are breaking out, that's a state of anarchy, and even though it might be confined to a rather small section of a large city, because there's no rule and order and nothing is being done to enforce rule and order. And what was the second part of your question, AJ?
How does it spread?
Okay, so anarchy spreads simply because those who can enforce the law do not enforce the law. And it spreads very easily when there's a great amount of disapproval of the ruling government, whether it be just or not, because people see like they've already thrown up their hands and they don't want to support the government. So anarchy is like a desperate choice. Just let everything fall apart. People no longer feel like supporting the existent government or civilization or state is something they have any interest in, because it doesn't help them. So as in many times in history when anarchy has broken out, it's because the people are starving or so oppressed and they just have no desire to keep enforcing the law and order. Anarchy, though, doesn't help anyone, because as we'll see in the histories of the French and Russian Revolution, anarchy led to the deaths of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of innocent people. So anarchy, politically, you could liken it to a brush fire. You let that fire burn and the wind comes, the whole state could burn down, because someone, when he saw that fire small, didn't put it out, okay? So just like you would see a brush fire and it's your duty to immediately notify the authorities and try to put it out, because it could kill thousands as it grows and spreads across the prairies. So anarchy has to be dealt with strongly right from the beginning, because it is the antithesis of law and order. It's the biggest threat to the state, because the purpose of the state is to defend us all. And anarchy is a state in which no one has any defense. The law of the claw rules, the law of the gun, the law of the sword. It's just a level of barbarity.
What is their goal for the country they want to take over?
So revolutionaries, in a general sense, obviously they want to grab the power for some reason or other, whatever their motivation is. And that usually means they have to defeat their opponents or somehow make an agreement with them to join their side. And so revolution, objectively speaking, is so that the government changes and is now in the hands of others who are more acceptable to whoever started the revolution. It doesn't mean anything has changed, but many revolutions have ulterior motives, and as we'll see in the French and Russian revolutions, the motives are much more than just taking power. It was destroying civilization, attacking Christianity, and radically transforming the economy and the social order. So it wasn't really just a political revolution, it was also a social and economic revolution.
Speaking of the French Revolution, what is the roles that caused the start of the French Revolution?
So the fundamental role was the era of absolutism, which started to spread in the 16th, 17th centuries. And the kings of Europe started to think that they had the right to claim all power in the state. It was kind of like a consequence of the fact that the kingdoms of Western Europe, by that age, had already acquired such a complete political domination of the territory of their national entity that the king already owned most of the land or controlled most of the land or had all the power and rights. And so consequently, the concept of absolutionism was now that he should pass all the laws. That's not the medieval concept. The medieval concept, there was a parliament. Cities had their own laws, provinces had their own laws, the church had its own law, and no one person had power to make law for everyone, and no one could abolish the rights of everything. So absolutism led the French kings, especially under Louis XIV thereafter, to start aggregating into their own hands all power. And if a king was omniscient and perfect and a saint and the most brilliant and learned man there was, that wouldn't be so much of a problem because he could exercise that authority justly, wisely, prudently, and in a timely fashion. But if he's not, then his courtiers start taking the power because the one person, the king, can't exercise it all. And they start using it in the name of the absolute king and oppressing the people. So there had been, it was a horrible year in 1789. There was a terrible winter, famine followed, there was crop failure. The French government was also heavily indebted for having attempted to support the American Revolution with wars with England. They had lost their navy, they rebuilt it. So the crown was on the verge of bankruptcy. The counselors of the king were actually trying to make him look bad and go bankrupt because the level of corruption of, you might call it, the deep state around the French monarchy was such that they now wanted power for themselves. It wasn't enough just to suck the blood off the monarchy and its goodwill, but they wanted the power themselves, so they were turning on the king. So in many ways, it's very analogous to what's going on in America because while Trump won the 2016 election, to the surprise of many, the deep state and the institutions who had been sucking away the authority of the presidency and the executive branch and of Congress for 50, 60 years now, they weren't going to have it. They didn't want a president like that. They wanted someone who was their own creature. And so after all the little games and tricks they had to bring him down, this is, I think, what one of the last cards they're playing. It was absolute open revolution, chaos, anarchy. Because in that way they try to make him look bad, try to incite him to do something, just as they tried to incite the French king to attack the crowds and cause problems. And sometimes, for example, Lafayette, who participated in a wonderful manner in the American Revolution, he went on to become one of the revolutionaries in the French Revolution, and he was in charge of the National Guard that was supposed to defend the king and help the king. And he did things like shoot at the crowd to make the king look bad. And then once he got into power in Parliament, he was actually opposed to the existence of the monarchy. So he switched sides because I guess he wanted power for himself. He dishonored his ancestors who were in the 7th and 8th Crusades. But that's the problem. And that was the problem in the French. That's what ultimately led to the French Revolution breaking out.
Why were the Catholics targeted and killed?
So the French Revolutionaries, once they got power, once they began the revolution, it was actually a period of 3 or 4 years, from 89 to 93, that the king was still alive, but not in control of the situation, where one group after the other sought power and they had different means. But since the concept of Catholic monarchy is the king receives his authority from God by being consecrated king by the church, there was an intimate union between the form of government and the faith of the people. So the revolutionaries who wanted to destroy the monarchy, and they were Freemasons, they were Protestants, they were Jews, they were secularists, they were atheists, they saw that they had to also destroy the church. In fact, they said, by destroying both institutions, or by destroying the monarchy and also bringing down the church, will show that these two institutions exist together and they can't exist except apart. Well, that wasn't true because the church survived the French Revolution, even though the monarchy was destroyed. So they openly attacked the Catholic religion. They established their own religion where you had to worship nature, and there was a 10-day week, and Christian churches, they stole 1/10 of the real estate of France that belonged to the church, and the church used to care for the poor. And they made all the priests state employees, but forced them to accept the new religion. And the priests that didn't, they put in the prison. And during a riot, they engineered that they would all be beheaded. So I think more than 5,000, maybe 10,000 Catholic clergy, religious nuns were beheaded in the French Revolution, because they're attempting to exterminate the Christian society in its heads and leaders and in its best examples. And a strong part of the French Revolution was supported in the part of Paris called the Communes. And we'll see that commune becomes the name for communist revolution, because the Russian Revolution is basically a reenactment of the French Revolution. It's an anti-Christic, diabolic agenda. And since they won the revolution and the victors write the history, what you've heard in school is that the French Revolution was a wonderful thing. It's an example for America. It liberated people from the Middle Ages. That's all a bunch of hullabaloo. The French Revolution took place after the American Revolution, and it wasn't anything like it, because the American Revolution, all the revolutionaries in America were God-fearing people. They never attacked churches. In the American Revolution, not one church was attacked or burnt down because it was a Christian institution. Synagogues weren't attacked. No religious institution was attacked because they saw the revolution as seeking political liberty. They weren't out to destroy civilization and change society or economy. But the French Revolution was completely atheistic and sought to destroy France, to destroy the whole system of nobility, the monarchy, and Christian civilization in institutions, by attacking people who were perfectly innocent solely because they represented the order they wanted to destroy. So we'll see that again in the Russian Revolution. That's a sign of what an unjust revolution. That's a sign of a vicious social movement that knows that it can't come to power unless it kills everyone that's honest and innocent. And this is why you can't take lightly the existence of groups like ANFR or BLM, because they are similar organizations. They don't care about who's honest and who's just. Matter of fact, they see a statue of anyone who's honest and just, whether it's Christopher Columbus or Juniper Serra or General Grant, they destroy it because they don't want you to remember what is honesty and justice. They want to put wicked, evil people in power. So that's why they attacked the Catholic Church in the French Revolution, and in all Marxist revolutions, they'll attack the church and any other Christian institution. In Russia, it was the Orthodox Church.
How has the French Revolution damaged the church in France and as a whole?
The revolution in France never ended. They still talk about perpetuating the revolution in France. I remember one time I was in France and I was taking a train and I had a ticket for the second-class car. So I figured it must be there was only 3 cars on the train, so I figured the first class is the first, and the second is the second, the third is third. You know, you're American, you think logically, rationally. So I was ready to get into the second car, and the conductor of the train said, "Do you have a first-class ticket?" I said, "No, I have a second-class ticket. That's why I'm getting into this car." He says, "No, this is the first-class car. The second-class car is the first car. No, is the third car, and the third-class car is the first car." So I said, "That makes no sense." He goes, "It makes perfect sense because we have had a revolution, and everyone is equal." So if everyone was equal, why is none of the cars, you know, oh boy, you know, and then so I asked someone on the train, tomorrow, will the cars be in the same order? Will the second class always be the first car and the third class, or this, you know? No, every day it changes. So you always have to ask which is the first class car. That's the level of insanity in France. In France, for example, you cannot find an organization of Christian doctors, because it is forbidden, according to the revolution, that there be any association between medicine and religion, or between astronomy and religion, or between geometry and religion, or between any aspect of the society and religion. So Frenchmen will tell you who are Christians, the same creeps that took power in the French Revolution still run the country out of Paris, and the rest of the country hates them for it, but they're constantly manipulating the laws of election and everything else to maintain power. And they've so reduced Christianity in France that they got everyone to zip their lip and say nothing, because as soon as you do anything, they'll come out for you. And the latest is this law saying where a cross around your neck, if you enter the French, if you go to town hall with a cross around your neck, you'll be arrested because you're trying to bring religion into the secular state. Because according to the French Revolution, the state must be secular. That means atheists must rule. You cannot even imply that anyone who believes in Christ has a right to hold authority in France. You can't even imply it. When Trump went to France some years ago, and said, God bless France, they all went wild, the atheists in government. How dare you say God bless France? Because in their conception, France is an atheistic, satanic state. Don't you dare bless it from God. That's how insane it is. And if you meet Catholics from France, they are apolitical because they've been trained, constantly hit, constantly punished. Don't you dare enter politics. Don't you say anything political. So if you go to a chapel where the clergy were trained in France, they're going to tell you not to have anything to do in politics because they've been trained to think that way in France. And the church in France had a great influence in the missions. And because of the French Revolution and what they've done to the church in France, a good part of the Catholic world has been disarmed because they're taught by French clergy not to participate in politics. But clergy like that are cowards, intellectually cowards, morally they're cowards, but especially when outside of France, they shouldn't act that way. And they shouldn't act that way in France. They should keep fighting it. But no, they all gave up because they prefer existence rather than faith. Okay? No Christian should surrender to a godless state, ever. We see in the ancient world, Christians practice their faith and were put to death through 10 persecutions. One persecution didn't shut them up, and 10 didn't shut them up. They won in the end because they never shut up and they always lived their faith. So that's what the French Revolution, and the French Revolution immediately started trying to conquer other countries, Italy, Germany, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain. They went around butchering clergy and nuns and monks and burning monasteries and churches down all throughout Europe and stealing artworks. A good number of the artworks of Europe are still in the Louvre at Paris, and the greedy little French atheistic government won't give them back, even though they belong to other countries. And it's completely outrageous. But the French government is still revolutionary. It's still, you might call it the first communist state. And they're it's a very evil institution. They try to break down religion throughout all the French colonies. They're constantly promoting organizations around the world that break down religion. Very evil. A dark shadow lies on France. France is not what it used to be. It's not a beautiful Catholic monarchy as it used to be. It's now a very evil, Masonic, atheistic state. And we shouldn't praise France. America wasted its blood defending France in 2 world wars because it's not worthy of defense. Or if we conquered France back from the Germans, we should have made it again a society like America where religion is not persecuted. But we didn't do that. And that was one of the great errors after the Second World War, a failure of the Eisenhower administration, in my opinion, because we didn't liberate the French. We just put them back into the same tyranny. And that was wrong.
Yeah. Speaking of all this destruction from the French Revolution, what other destruction has it caused to this very day?
Okay, so I forgot to mention that the French Revolution also butchered tens of thousands of people. There was a time called the Reign of Terror where if you were considered against the revolution, they just took you to the town hall and chopped your head off. And they were chopping people's heads off every hour of the day, constantly. Tens of thousands had their heads chopped off because they knew they had to destroy the past and anyone who was sane. So to this day, the French Revolution spread ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity, which is just a false slogan meaning, I'm going to enslave you, you're going to be the insubordinate, and you have to regard me as your big brother that will control everything. It's the exact opposite of what the words mean. The concept of a liberal democracy. Okay, so democracy as an institution means the people rule. But modern democracies, you think you're running, but you're not really running the government. What's running the government are parties that want to destroy Christianity, break down Christian morals, and constantly pump wealth from the poor to the wealthy in the name of letting the people rule, okay? So they're constantly talking about you run the country, you have the right, it's of the people, by the people, for the people. But if you look at the whole course of history, you see it's not of the people, by the people, for the people. It's of an elite, for an elite, and at the expense of the people. I always talk this about in America. Look at the American Revolution. The men who shed their blood were all devout Christians, okay? There were some Jews, yeah, and there were some, non-Christians there too in a minority. But they were devout Christians. Did they get a country that recognizes Jesus Christ or the Bible as the law of the land? No, they don't. They were defrauded. And in every revolution, the revolutionaries will say one thing, but once they get in power, they'll defraud you because it never was about helping you. It was always about helping them. So the French Revolution actually ends in a dictatorship called the Napoleonic Empire. Napoleon, who was in the military, he seized power and he set up an empire. He wasn't as bad as the revolutionaries. He was more friendly to the church, but he pushed the revolution around Europe and attempted to even conquer all of Europe because he was a megalomaniac. And having gotten rid of the French king, the French revolutionaries were hateful to the other monarchs of Europe who saw it as a threat to their own power. So France is now a missionary of falsehood, false concepts of political order and destiny, and the same kind of empty slogan. So you have to wake up and realize, well, why is their slogan liberty, equality, fraternity? Why isn't their slogan Jesus Christ, his kingdom, and his reign? Okay, because that's sanity and civilization, and that's what built Europe. No, because they're about destroying that. Okay, they're about destroying those three things.
Now we go to the October Revolution that murdered the Tsar and his family. Can you speak on Lenin and Trotsky and how they turned the people of Russia with lies against the Tsar?
The Russian Revolution has to be, after the French, or maybe even before the French, the saddest chapter in the history of any European nation. The Russian people are a great people, deep Christian faith, a people of great resolve, fortitude, valor, courage, a great sense of tradition, a strong national identity. Okay, and they had always been ruled by a czar for at least the last 500 years before the Russian Revolution. Well, the monarchy had become absolutist. The ministers of the king became corrupt, and there were a lot of problems in moving into a modern era, industrializing and stuff like that, because a modern economic development required a lot of economic liberty among everyone. And the Russian state had always been one that emphasized control of everything. And they had peasantry in Russia too, so that transition was difficult too. But there was famine again in 1915. There was a war with Germany, and the German emperor, William, did a very evil thing. He allowed Lenin to get on a train with other Marxists, and he sent them to Russia to take down the monarchy. And that was very evil. And that decision has led to the deaths of maybe 200 million people in the world. Okay. And he knew better than that, because he knew these people anti-monarchical. That was one of the most evil things that the German Kaiser did. And who was Lenin? Lenin is usually championed as a man of the people, a poor man who just wanted to help the masses, and honorable and upright and virtuous in all his ways. Nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, this guy came from a privileged upper middle class family. It seems that he hardly ever did an honest day of work, and his mother was paying all his bills. What did he do in life other than write nasty books saying to kill innocent people and seize power for the people, but he meant for himself? So he was a completely dishonest piece of, and Lenin is actually not his real name. His real name is Ulyanovich, and his father was his wife's father was a convert from Judaism. He was raised a Russian Orthodox, but when he was 15 years old, his father died of brain cancer, and at that point he rejected God. I guess he felt God was at fault, and he becomes anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-religious, and destroy any sense of paternal authority. Very similar to the woman who's co-founder of Black Lives Matter. So he had some serious religious psychological problems, and he spent all his years writing, documents about this and that. He got involved in the socialist organizations from the start. And he got a copy of Das Kapital by Karl Marx, and we talked about Karl Marx yesterday in our program, Black Lives Matter. And he had that translated into Russian, and he pushed the whole concept of the communist state, where they want a revolution of the proletariat, a socialist order, and then a communist, so-called perfect society. But it's just a spiel for them to grab power for themselves, because a bunch of greedy psychopathic maniacs. And so he wrote to incite hate because he knew that if he could propagate hate among the masses, he could blind them into doing what he wanted them to do. So it was psychological manipulation in the worst sense of politics. And he had no interest in human rights because once he got in power, he had thousands of people executed that he didn't like. And, you know, he did things in 1 month more cruel than the Tsar had done in his whole lifetime. So it was another complete fraud. The poor Russian people, and he engineered it in such a way that when the revolution did break out and a Republican government was set up in Petrograd so that there was a parliament with people voted around the country, he saw that to seize power, he had to be violent. And his groups of the Bolsheviks, they seized the armory, got all the guns, and they went around town and they executed first all the pacifist socialists so that they would grab control of the socialist movement. And then they went around massacring their opponents, and that's how the White Revolution, that's how the Civil War in Russia broke out. And his party was all about, they'd go into towns and they massacre every Christian, anyone who was opposed to them. It was complete butchery. And the Russian Civil War was, it shouldn't really be called a civil war because it was the Russian people who didn't want the Bolsheviks attempting to defend themselves against them. But unfortunately, the Freemasons were behind the Bolshevik Revolution. They were funded by Wall Street, Jews on Wall Street, financial interests in Wall Street that wanted an ally in Russia that take down the Russian monarchy and open up all the mineral wealth of that country for commercial exploitation. Whereas the White Russians were disunited ethnically and didn't really get, I mean, America did send some troops to help them out, but it was only half-hearted for appearance sake. So it was a terrible, terrible tragedy, and it didn't end with that. It went on all the way until '89, and to a certain extent, Russia still suffers under it.
Yeah.
A terrible tragedy. This is why Our Lady came to Fatima and warned in 1917, you know, consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart because they're going to suffer some horrible things. But the popes didn't listen to her, even though that great miracle should have obliged them to. And the Russian people have suffered from that.
Just learning, you know, my Russian history, ancestry. There's this one crazy, weird monk that I always thought that was, you know, connected to Lenin and Trotsky, that got into the minds of the Tsar and his wife, Gregory Yurovich Rasputin.
Rasputin, no. Rasputin wasn't a communist or a socialist. He was a religious charlatan. He wasn't even really a monk, but he dressed as a monk and he was involved in kind of spiritualism. And he got his foot into the palace because he promised he could cure Prince Alexei, because the Tsarist family had for several generations been marrying into the other families of Europe, and they acquired from Queen Victoria the gene for hemophilia. So the Tsar's son, Alexei, who would have been heir to the throne, had hemophilia, which was, they didn't understand what caused it back then. It's a lack of clotting cells, the cells that cause clotting in red blood. So he said he could heal him, and he came in and said some prayers, and there was a temporary recovery, which probably certainly had nothing to do with Rasputin. But he was a man who drank a lot. He was a strong constitution, and he slowly got power over the king through his wife, and basically kept him from doing the reforms necessary to have saved the monarchy and oppose the revolution. So he was like a negative influence. When finally the ministers of the Tsar realized that this guy was evil and they had to get rid of him, they gave him enough poison to kill an elephant and shot him and stabbed him many times. He still wouldn't die, so they dumped him in a ice frozen river under the ice, and he was still alive for a while as he went down the river. He was one tough cookie, and he's entered into kind of like the folklore of who he was and what was his role. But it was a sign that, in a way, it was a sign, it was a punishment for the royal family not remaining faithful to the Orthodox faith, because the Orthodox bishops, the Russian Orthodox bishops, said, don't trust this guy. He's a charlatan. He's not teaching true doctrine. And it was just one of those things that a monarch has to be faithful to Jesus Christ. That's where he gets his authority. And if he's not, you can't presume, especially if you take someone as your counselor who's not giving you the counsel of Christ, you put yourself in a very dangerous situation. So that's who's Rasputin. And there's been several movies made about him. He's a fascinating figure just because he's just so strange in his own way.
Yeah. What was the big catalyst that caused the fall of the Tsarist Russia in October?
Okay, so it was the riots that broke out in the military because Russia was losing the First World War. Then famine broke out. And that probably wouldn't have brought down the Tsar. But the Marxists, who had been planning for 20, 40 years to bring down the Tsar, were mostly Jewish socialists, they realized this is their moment to strike, to take the great amount of dissent among the army. They had been working to infiltrate the army right from the beginning of the war, saying they're opposed to the war, but getting their people to join the army so that they could work on all the men psychologically, constantly attacking the government, constantly speaking ill. So when the soldiers in Petrograd went on strike, they exploited the moment and started the revolution. So it's a perfect example why no Marxist organization should ever be tolerated to exist in the state, because they will always worm their way in. They can't bring down the government today. They'll work to bring the government down in 40 years. And once they get power, they'll mass murder everyone because they're psychopathic. It's an ideology of hate and self-destruction. And we can see Antifa and Black Lives Matter didn't come into existence this year. They've been around a while and nothing has been done about them. So if something was done about them at the beginning of the Trump administration, we wouldn't be seeing the problems now. This is why when you elect a president, he has to be someone not just to talk. As soon as he enters power, he has to take decisive action, okay? Especially against Marxists, who are the biggest threat to true democracy.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next one, how did the royal family get kidnapped and get killed?
Well, I'm not so up on the details. Yeah, once they lost power, they were in a very vulnerable situation. But the Marxists, the Bolsheviks, made an effort to conquer that part of the country where they were hiding and take control of them. Once they had them, they didn't execute them right away because they feared what the people would think. But when they finally did the dastardly deed, they took them to a remote place and shot them in cold blood, chopped up the bodies, poured acid on them, and dumped them down a well. And their whereabouts were hidden for many, many years. Only decades later, it became known whatever happened to them. It was a vicious act. They were killing children at like 8 years old. Prince Alexei, I think, was like, I don't know, 8 or 10, murdered him without cause. They wanted to exterminate the entire dynasty so that the monarchy could never be restored. And that's standard Marxist practice, is extermination, because they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in equality. They'll talk about equality, tolerance, acceptance. Until they're in power, then it's like mass murder, and we're going to come and get you no matter what, because you said something against us 20 years ago, and you're on our list, because we never forgive. And that's who Marxists are. And so the Russian Orthodox Church considers the royal family as martyrs. They canonize them because and they judge that they were killed out of hatred for Christianity and prevent a Christian monarchy from coming back. And I would agree that that's why they were killed. And but were they saints in themselves? You know, did they give an excellent? Maybe some of the members of his family. I don't deny that because I don't know their entire stories. But the Russians, if they had been a family that was truly loved by the people, and the revolution would have never happened, and certainly there would have been forces to defend them. So it was part of their role of governing, the wanting to have too much power in their hands, not really having a good paternal care of their own people, which led to the ultimate tragedy in a negative sense. The Marxists are totally at fault. And no one was ever prosecuted for the murders. No one was ever found guilty. There was never any international court for all the crimes committed by the Marxists. The American papers whitewashed it all over. You'll never hear about how bad the Russian Revolution was in public schools or how many tens of millions of people they killed in Russia. So, terrible thing, terrible.
Yeah. That movie about what Stalin did to Ukraine, Mr. Jones, it still hasn't got to the theaters yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it will ever will.
Yeah, but because the theaters in the United States are owned by Chinese companies, which are communists, so they're certainly not going to talk about the crimes of communists. And the fact that a movie about what communists did to people in other nations can't get in the theaters in the US is something that should concern all Americans. It shows you how deep the infiltration is in America and how close we are to communist revolution. And if these people get power, they're going to kill at least 30 million people. They're going to they're going to lop off the top, the best part of the country, so that they can grab power forever. And so you cannot take lightly what is going on. You need to be proactive and insist that authorities take swift and decisive action. And you should only vote for people who are going to do that.
Yeah. That brings up the next one. How did Leninism begin to go into communism, and how did that spread throughout the earth?
Okay, so Lenin had his own ideas of Marxism, and it was, but he didn't remain in power for long. I think by 24 or so, he dies. He had bad health, but some thought that Stalin got rid of him. Russia felt obligated, because they were Marxists, to promote Marxism around the world. And they helped Mao come into power in China. They helped Castro come to power in Cuba. And then Cuba spread communism to all Latin America. And the Russians were behind the attempted communist takeovers of many, many countries all around the world. And the whole power of the Russian states then became to promote communism and the takeover of other countries. They only succeeded, interestingly enough, in countries where the mass of the people were unlettered and uneducated, because anyone with a noodle in their head can see these people are liars. Only people who are rude and more capable of falling into excessive anger because they're not educated fell under their spell. But it was a long century of, as I say, somewhere around 200 million people were killed by communists around the world. And still, there's never been an international trial of these people, a condemnation of the ideology. So it's festering still around the West. When the wall came down in Berlin and Russia officially gave up, the Soviet Union officially fell apart and gave up its communist state, all the leftists in the West were really angry. I remember how angry they were. And they didn't give up communism in '89. They worked slowly, and now they're out to bring it about in America. So you can be very sure that if Biden wins the election, or they're going to move for a communist state, he'll certainly won't resist it. And if Trump wins, they may even assassinate him so they can still get in power. So until there is a direct political attack on the Marxists in America who have infiltrated many political institutions, America's in grave jeopardy. Grave jeopardy. We can't pretend it's not.
That brings up, has this entered into the Democrat Party, who supports Antifa and Black Lives Matter?
So the Communist Party in the United States, I think it was in the 40s or 50s, it was outlawed. I mean, it was even in the 30s. It was illegal. So seeing that it was illegal, the Marxists are very devious people. They said, well, we'll become Democrats, and we'll slowly try to convince the Democratic Party to become Marxist. So what the Democratic Party stands for today is nothing like what it stood for in the 40s. It was very pro-American, very pro-Christian, very pro-worker, a lot of honest programs. And I think many of us who are Catholics had parents and grandparents who voted Democrat their whole life because it was a good party. But now the party is completely Marxist. The only arguments in the Democratic Party is how Marxist it is. You have Bernie Sanders, who's an absolute piece of moral trash. He stole electricity from his landlord by hooking up a wire to a different floor of his apartment building and plugging it in so he wouldn't have to pay for it. And he's never done an honest day in his life, and he thinks a lot of people in the country should be robbed so that he can live better. And even when he runs a campaign against Hillary and lets her steal the nomination, he gets an extra house from it. So this man who's in favor of helping the poor has now 3 houses, but I don't think he's ever helped anyone even get 1 house. Complete hypocrite. You have Warren, who's just an outrage. She figures that she can get elected by just saying the most outrageous Marxist things possible. And you have Biden, who would let all these creeps run riot in America while pretending he's not really that left, he's a centrist. So I'd say the Democratic Party is completely Marxist now, and if you vote for them, you're voting for your own suicide, because you think they're going to help you? No, they'll come for you.
Now the next section is the dangers of revolutionists. I believe America is trying to be toppled. Do you?
I think it's definitely, that's the agenda. The international Marxists know that if they can bring America down, they can bring down the rest of the world. And they're in close league with the communists in China, the communists in Cuba. Nearly all the big leaders in the US Democratic Party have gone and taken courses on politics in Cuba, even when it was illegal to go there. Don't imagine that it's just a coincidence that a company in Venezuela, which was a communist dictatorship, owned the intellectual property rights on the software that ran on voting counting machines in America. It's not a coincidence. So the fact that they've spread their power so deep and have big funders like George Soros behind them is not coincidence. They want to bring America down. They want to enslave America, because America is the wealthiest country. You can steal the wealth of America. You can spread Marxist dictatorship to the whole world and enslave people for 1,000 years. So America is not just fighting for its own existence, it's fighting for the liberty of all humanity in this battle.
Okay. Do you believe these revolutionists, funded by George Soros, will continue to try to attack America and other countries until they take them over?
Yeah, they will. Until Soros and his whole family is arrested, until all their assets are taken, until everyone who's funded Marxist revolution in America is arrested and have all their assets seized as seditionists, it's going to go on. You need a strong defense. And that's why America needs a Christian political party, because the Republicans are completely infiltrated. The Democrats already are Marxists. Republicans just won't do anything. I mean, Trump, for all his virtues and wonderful things that he does, doesn't do enough. He's slowing the revolution. He isn't uprooting it, okay? And it needs to be uprooted, or it's going to threaten your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, when it could more easily be stopped now.
Yeah. You brought me to another topic for another show.
Okay.
The answer to the last question. Is there a way to stop these revolutions?
Yes, Christian party, a Christian political party, a truly American political party, one that is ideologically opposed to Marxism and foreign political influence. Any ideology that wants to exploit our free, open democracy and use it for the interests of some small evil group that wants to destroy American society, culture, history, identity, freedom, liberty, economy, work, salaries, or savings, okay? So that's what we need. Trump will probably win the next election. I'm not certain of that. But at the end of his 8-year term, he can't run again. And that's the time for Christians to organize a party and run as a third party and win the presidency and really take America on a course that goes against what they've been doing for 50 years in this country to break down America. So middle America has to rise up and make decisive decisions. if you start making compromises with one party or another, you're just betraying your future to two groups that are already heavily infiltrated. We need a whole new party.
Mm-hmm. It took a Keynesian to win the Second World War.
Exactly. You need someone who really lives in America and loves America and is American. My grandparents emigrated to the United States from Italy, so I have strong ties to Italy, and I have double citizenship. But still, I love America, and I want America to be American. But Americans have to stand up and do something about it. You have to wake up and realize the forces opposed are very evil, they're very clever, they're very devious, and they know all the tricks in the book that convince people to give them power. So you have to wake up and smell the coffee. You have to decide to be an American. You just can't glide along and hope to be one or say you're one. You actually have to decide to do it and then devote all your efforts to defending that and making it a reality for everyone.
These guys had been having a lot of practice, like 1700s to today.
Practice in doing what?
Taking over countries.
Oh yeah, okay. So Marxists, that's their whole effort. They live, they breathe. That's what gets them up in the morning, because they're just evil, psychopathic people. So Americans got to motivate themselves on their Christian faith or love for the country. They have to have a love for their neighbor and for their country and for what they are, and appreciate for what it is, and get informed about and run for office and take decisive action. You can't tolerate this kind of stuff. You got to oppose it with force. And you have to be able to see through all their lies and all their slogans, like Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with blacks, and you have to say open to them. You're the racist organization because you're exploiting the just causes, the causes of injustice among the black community for your own ends, which are international Marxism and the destruction of America, not helping black people. In fact, your organization destroys their neighborhoods. So you're their enemy, and you need to be arrested. That's the kind of fortitude you have to have intellectually and politically to fight for America.
Well, you've been watching Order Militarist Radio TV on YouTube. Please stay tuned for our next show, which will be continued in this series on how to fund and start a Christian party.
Okay, that'd be a great talk. And if you are, now that the radio station has a call-in, maybe we could do a call-in doing it, announce what hour we're recording it, even though we don't yet record live, because we'd love to have some Christian ministers call in and have a discussion about this, because I think we can all agree that this is something that is desperately needed in the United States.
Yeah. Please support the radio station, YouTube channel, everything, by going to ordo-militaris.net. Go to our Teespring store. Click any of the show posts on the homepage. Scroll all the way down. You'll find how to make a monthly membership there. And go over to ordo-militaris.us. There's a blue link for get the Gonfaloni flag of Lepanto. Exact same one you're seeing back there.
Yeah. And neither AJ nor myself take any salary. What we do, we live for the love of Jesus Christ and to help Christians who are persecuted. So your funds go to help buy equipment or publicity or pay expenses of the websites and get out the message and help raise support for persecuted Christians everywhere and all the different humanitarian works we do.
Yeah. Please like, share, and subscribe to the show and channel. And this is Order Militarist Radio TV signing off. Day is full.
Deusville.